Welcome back to Sacred Arc, a podcast about life, loss, and the soul in between. I'm Kimberley, a certified grief counselor, death doula, and whether I wanted to be or not, a lifelong student of grief. Before we begin, I just want to say thank you for being here. Every person who listens becomes part of this community, and that means more to me than I can ever fully express. You may be listening from somewhere completely different, carrying a grief that looks nothing like someone else's. But there is something that connects us here, the experience of loving, losing, and learning to keep living. Your presence here helps keep this space alive. You can help this community continue to grow by following the podcast, sharing an episode with someone who might need it, leaving a comment or review, or connecting with me on social media at Sacred Arc Podcast. And if you feel called to work with me or just reach out and say hello or share your story with me, please use the contact link in my bio. I would love to hear from you. Thank you for bringing your story into this space and sharing your beautiful energy with me. Take a deep breath in, settle in, and let's begin. We spend our lives preparing for almost everything: graduation, marriage, careers, retirement, vacations, the birth of a child. And yet we spend very little time preparing for the one experience every human being has in common: death. No matter our age, our religion, our culture, our income, our accomplishments, or where we were born, every single one of us will one day leave this life. And yet, for something so universal, we rarely talk about it. We avoid it. We fear it. We whisper about it. We push it into the distance. We act as though it belongs to someone else's family, someone else's future, someone else's story. But the truth is, death has always been sitting quietly beside life, not separate from it, part of it. As a grief counselor, a death doula, and someone who has experienced profound personal loss, I've come to believe something that may sound surprising. I don't think death itself creates as much suffering as our fear of death, our silence around death, our unwillingness to prepare for it, our reluctance to even speak its name. This season of Sacred Arc isn't about becoming comfortable with death. It's about becoming more comfortable talking about it. Because I believe understanding death has the potential to teach us something extraordinary about living. One of the questions I found myself asking over the years is this: why are we so afraid of death? Is it death itself, or is it everything we attach to it? I honestly don't think most people are actually afraid of being dead. I think we're afraid of the unknown. We're afraid of pain. We're afraid of losing control. We're afraid of leaving the people we love. We're afraid of being left behind. We're afraid of unfinished conversations. We're afraid that we won't have enough time. We're afraid of being forgotten, and maybe more than anything, we're afraid because death reminds us that our time here is limited. Death asks us to acknowledge something most of us spend our lives trying not to think about: that this life is temporary, that every sunrise eventually has a sunset. And perhaps that's why death feels so uncomfortable, because it confronts us with the one thing we cannot control. Sometimes I wonder, were we actually born afraid of death, or did we learn to fear it? Throughout history, humans have searched for ways to explain what happens after we die, because death is the one destination none of us can fully describe. We can study it, witness it, create beliefs around it, but none of us can completely remove the mystery. And whenever mystery exists, our imaginations begin filling in the blanks. Across history, cultures have created stories, symbols, myths, figures. Some offered comfort. Others inspired fear, and often they did both. Perhaps no image represents death more than the Grim Reaper. A hooded figure dressed in black, a skeleton carrying a scythe, waiting patiently for our time to come. That image didn't appear by accident. It became especially popular during the Middle Ages after the Black Death swept across Europe, killing millions of people. Death became impossible to ignore. Artists began portraying death as a farmer harvesting crops. The symbolism was powerful. Just as a harvest comes when the grain is ready, death eventually comes for every life. Over time, that image became woven into books, paintings, folklore, movies, and of course, our collective imagination. Death slowly transformed from a natural event into something that felt frightening, something lurking in the shadows. Long before modern medicine, people also looked to nature for answers. Certain birds, animals, dreams, storms, the changing seasons. Many became symbols connected to life and death. In parts of Europe, crows and ravens became associated with death because they were often seen near battlefields and places where people had died. Yet in other traditions, they symbolized wisdom, transformation, or messengers between worlds. Owls tell a similar story. Some cultures see them as wise protectors. Others view them as omens, the same animal, completely different meaning. Among many Native American nations, there isn't one universal belief system. Each tribe carries its own traditions. In some, the coyote represents a trickster, a teacher, or transformation, not death itself. But other tribes view certain animals or dreams as spiritual reminders to pay attention rather than prediction of tragedy. I think that's fascinating because what it tells us is this. Human beings have always searched for meaning, not simply because we're afraid, but because we long to understand. We want to know that life makes sense. We want to know the people we love are somehow still connected to us. Perhaps that's why so many grieving people notice butterflies or hummingbirds or cardinals, or meaningful dreams, or songs that seem to arrive at exactly the right moment. Whether those experiences are spiritual, psychological, or simply reminders of love, they help us feel connected. And connection is something grief longs for more than almost anything else. Sometimes I wonder if we're asking the wrong question. Maybe we're not actually afraid of death. Maybe we're afraid of separation, of losing the people we love, of leaving unfinished business behind. Or we're afraid we'll be forgotten. Or perhaps we're simply afraid because death reminds us how deeply we love. And if that's true, then perhaps our fear has never really been about death at all. Perhaps it's always been about love. Several years ago, I was teaching a yoga class and a student told me a story. She was walking through a cemetery in Belize when something caught her attention. Instead of seeing the words birth and death engraved on the headstones, she saw sunrise and sunset. Something about those words felt softer, more peaceful, more natural. Not because they erased death, but because they framed it differently. Not as a beginning and an ending, but as part of a cycle. A sunrise, a sunset, a rhythm. Every single day the sun rises, and every single evening it slips below the horizon. And none of us panic when it disappears, because we trust it isn't truly gone. We know another sunrise will come. Now, I'm not suggesting that death is easy, or that losing someone we love isn't devastating. I've lived that reality. I know what it feels like to lose my mom. I know what it feels like to lose my grandma. I know what it feels like to lose my son. Those losses changed me forever. But something about those gravestones stayed with me, because they invited me to think differently. Not necessarily about what happens after we die, but about how we choose to understand death while we're still here. Whether someone believes in heaven, reincarnation, energy, consciousness, or simply believes that love continues through memory, there's something beautiful about remembering that every ending has always existed alongside every beginning. That sunrise and sunset belong to the very same day. One thing I've become fascinated by over the years is realizing that not every culture fears death the way many of us do in Western society. For many of us, death is something we avoid. We hide it. We don't bring children into conversations about it. We separate it from everyday life until we're forced to confront it ourselves. But many cultures have developed an entirely different relationship with death, not because it hurts less, but because they've found ways to keep love present. In Mexico, families celebrate Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead. Despite the name, it isn't really about celebrating death, it's about celebrating life. Families come together, they build beautiful altars, display photographs, cook favorite meals, tell stories, play music, light candles, children participate. Grandparents are remembered. The people who have died remain part of the family conversations. They aren't forgotten simply because they're gone. In Japan, families celebrate a time dedicated to honoring ancestors. They visit graves, they light lanterns, they gather together. The focus isn't on saying goodbye forever, it's on maintaining connection across generations. Among certain people in Indonesia, death is viewed as a gradual transition rather than an immediate ending. Families may continue caring for their loved one before burial, speaking to them and including them in daily life until funeral ceremonies take place. To many of us, that may sound unfamiliar, but it reminds us of something important. There isn't only one way to honor someone we love. Even here in the United States, we're beginning to see people rethink what remembrance can look like. Celebrations of life, memorial gardens, green burials, memory quilts, planting trees, cooking favorite family recipes on birthdays, continuing traditions, finding ways to keep love woven into everyday life. What all of these practices have in common is this: they recognize that death ends a life, but it doesn't necessarily end a relationship. Love continues, memory continues, and legacy continues. I sometimes wonder if part of our fear comes from treating death as something completely separate from life, something we refuse to look at, something we only acknowledge when it arrives at our front door. But what if we talked about it more openly? What if remembering someone wasn't reserved only for funerals? What if grief became something we carried with community instead of silence? Perhaps death wouldn't become easier, but maybe it would become less lonely. And I think that's one of the greatest gifts other cultures offer us, not a different way of dying, a different way of loving. One thing I've thought about often is how differently we prepare for birth than we do for death. When someone is expecting a baby, preparation begins months before the child arrives. We celebrate, we throw baby showers, we decorate nurseries, we choose paint colors, we fold tiny clothes, we read parenting books, we attend childbirth classes, we write birth plans, we pack hospital bags, choose music for labor, and invite family to celebrate. Birth is surrounded with intention, with ritual, with preparation, with community. But death, the one experience every single one of us will eventually face, often receives almost none of that same attention. Many people don't know what their loved one wanted. They never talked about burial or cremation, whether they wanted hospice, whether they hoped to remain at home, what music they loved, what stories they wanted shared, who they wanted beside them. Those conversations are often postponed until there's a crisis, when emotions are already overwhelming, when decisions have to be made quickly, when families are exhausted and heartbroken. And I sometimes wonder, what if we prepared for death with even a fraction of the love and intention that we prepare for birth? Not because we're expecting someone to die tomorrow, but because death isn't a failure of life, it's part of life. What if we normalized conversations about legacy, forgiveness, values, unfinished conversations, and how we hope to be remembered long before those conversations became urgent? I don't think it would remove all fear. Death will probably always feel sacred and mysterious and emotional, but perhaps it wouldn't feel so unfamiliar. Perhaps one of the greatest gifts we can give the people we love isn't avoiding these conversations. Perhaps it's having the courage to begin them. When we refuse to talk about death, we often lose more than the opportunity to plan. Sometimes we lose the opportunity to say the things that mattered most, the apology that never came, the forgiveness that was never offered, the story that was never shared, the question that was never asked, the I love you that everyone assumed could wait until tomorrow. One of the greatest tragedies isn't death itself, it's believing we'll always have more time. And that's something death teaches us, whether we're ready for the next lesson or not. One of the greatest gifts of becoming a death doula has been the privilege of sitting beside people during one of the most vulnerable seasons of their lives. People often ask me if it's depressing, and honestly, it isn't. It's heartbreaking at times, it's sacred, it's humbling, but it has also been one of the greatest teachers I've ever had. Because when you sit beside someone whose life is coming to an end, something remarkable begins to happen. People rarely spend those moments talking about money or promotions or things they owned. They don't usually talk about the expensive car they wish they'd bought or the bigger house they never had. Instead, they talk about people. They talk about love, about relationships, about regrets, about forgiveness, about the memories that made their life meaningful. They talk about children, grandchildren, old friends, adventures, Simple moments that seemed ordinary at the time but became extraordinary in hindsight. What I've learned is that as life draws to a close, people often become incredibly clear about what truly mattered. And I sometimes wonder, why do we wait till the end of life to gain that clarity? Why don't we give ourselves permission to live that way now? I also think it's important to separate two ideas that often get blended together, the fear of death and the fear of dying. I don't think they're the same thing. Many people aren't actually afraid of being dead. They're afraid of the process that comes before it. Will I suffer? Will I lose my independence? Will I become a burden? Will I be alone? Will my family be okay? Will I have unfinished business? Will people remember me? Those fears are deeply human, and they deserve compassion. But I've also noticed something. When people begin having honest conversations about death, those fears often soften. Not because the uncertainty disappears, but because silence begins to disappear. Death becomes less of a stranger and more of a conversation. There's another part of this conversation that I think deserves space: religion. For many people, faith is one of the greatest sources of comfort when facing death. The belief that we'll see our loved ones again, that life continues beyond this one, that death isn't the end. Those beliefs have carried countless people through unimaginable loss. And I deeply respect that. But for others, religion has had the opposite effect. Instead of bringing peace, it's created fear. Fear of getting it wrong, fear of not believing the right thing. Fear that someone they love isn't in heaven because they didn't follow a particular faith or accept a particular belief. Fear that they themselves won't be accepted. I've met people who weren't afraid of dying. They were afraid of being judged or condemned or separated from the people they love forever. And I understand why those fears exist. And I also know that many different religions and spiritual traditions hold very different beliefs about what happens after we die. Some believe in heaven and hell. Some believe in reincarnation. Some believe our spirits return to the universe. Some believe our ancestors remain close, and some aren't sure what happens at all. And perhaps it's okay to admit that we don't have every answer. Personally, I've found that certainty has become less important to me than compassion. I'd rather spend my life asking, how can I love people while they're still here, than living in constant fear that I might have every spiritual answer exactly right. Whatever your beliefs may be, my hope is that they bring you closer to love, closer to compassion, closer to peace, not further away from those things. Because if our beliefs only leave us terrified, perhaps they're inviting us to ask deeper questions rather than stop asking altogether. Losing my mom changed me. Losing my grandma changed me. Losing my son changed me in ways I don't think I'll ever fully be able to explain. Those losses taught me something I wish I could have learned without so much pain, that time isn't guaranteed. Not next year, not next month, not tomorrow. We live as though there will always be another birthday, another holiday, another phone call, another chance to say the things we've been meaning to say, but life doesn't always unfold that way. Death has a way of stripping away everything that isn't essential. It reminds us that the little things are actually the big things. The conversations around the dinner table, a hug, a shared laugh, watching a sunset, holding someone's hand. The ordinary moments we often rush through become the moments we would give anything to have back. As strange as it sounds, death has made me more grateful for life. It has made me love harder, forgive sooner, pay attention more deeply. It has reminded me that every ordinary day is actually extraordinary, because none of us know how many we have. If talking about death makes you uncomfortable, you're not alone. Most of us were never taught how to have these conversations. Many of us grew up believing death was something to avoid discussing, something scary, something to whisper about. But maybe that's exactly why we need to talk about it, because avoiding death doesn't prevent it. It only prevents us from preparing for it. Preparing doesn't mean expecting it tomorrow. It means living intentionally today. It means having conversations while we still can. It means saying, I love you, offering forgiveness, sharing our stories, creating memories, living in such a way that when our own sunset eventually comes, we know we truly lived our sunrise. Perhaps preparing for death isn't really about dying at all. Perhaps it's about learning how to live with greater intention while we're here. As we begin this season together, I don't want this to be a season about death. I want it to be a season about humanity, about love, about legacy, about caregiving, about forgiveness, about fear, about hope, about the conversations we've been avoiding. We'll talk about death doulas, hospice, anticipatory grief, the final days of life, funeral traditions, different cultural beliefs, legacy, and how to support the people we love through one of life's most sacred transitions. But underneath every one of those conversations is really a conversation about love. Because that's what death reveals. It reveals what mattered, who mattered, how deeply we are capable of loving another human being. Before we close today, if it feels okay to you, I want to invite you to close your eyes here. Just know if this episode stirred up anything inside of you that's made you feel uncomfortable, you're not alone. Conversations about death have that effect. Take one slow breath in through your nose and gently let it out through your mouth. Don't judge yourself for feeling a certain way. Just sit here. Notice your breath as you slow things down. Now ask yourself, if I truly accepted that life doesn't last forever, what would I do differently? Who would I call? Who would I forgive? What words have I been waiting to say? What dream have I been postponing? What really matters? Just sit with those questions for a moment, not with fear, but with curiosity. I keep coming back to that little cemetery story in Belize, those simple words, sunrise, sunset. Not because they answered every question I have about death, they didn't. I still have questions. I imagine I always will. But they reminded me that life has always existed in rhythms, morning and evening, arrival and departure, holding on and letting go. Maybe we spend so much time fearing the sunset that we've forgotten to notice the beauty of the daylight we're living in. Because every life has its dawn, every life has its dusk. And what matters most isn't how long the day lasted, it's how fully we loved when the light was still here. This has been Sacred Arc. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll meet you again in the space between.